got another walkthrough video. I've been getting some good feedback on them. So today we're going to be talking about the Pentax Program Plus, distributed in North America as the Program Plus. Everywhere else in the world it's called the Program A, and it's denoted right there. Somewhat related to the Super Program, or the Super A, is a different model, and that one has an LED like right there that shows what shutter speed you're firing at. Fun fact, when I bought this, I thought I was actually buying the other one, so this was a little bit of a mistake buy, but I do like this camera, so it all worked out in the end. But let's talk about this real quick. This is one of the later SLR models that Pentax released. Came out in 1984, and it's kind of like the continuation of like the ME Supers and all that stuff. It has the same copal shutter mechanism here, which means it can fire at higher speeds more reliably, and you don't have to worry about the cloth getting in the way. And it has some pretty interesting functionality. As you can see that there's little contact points here, which means if you have the proper lens on here, which would be a KA lens, it will register that. So when you have it on auto, you can set the lens on auto and it will auto select a shutter speed and an aperture for you to fire at. But you can also just put a normal Pentax lens on there, something like just a normal K mount, and if you have it on auto, then it's an aperture priority. So you select the aperture and then it will select the shutter speed to correspond with that and to make sure that the exposure is correct. Then you have the manual setting here with the typical up-down arrows to select the different speeds. A 1/100th of a second flash sync speed. If you've got the right flash, which is like a Pentax flash, it'll register in the viewfinder when it's charged up and ready to go. And if you keep it at 100, then it will fire in sync with that. And then a bulb. So pretty easy. And then, as is typical with all of the ME Supers, MGs, MXs, any of those Pentaxes that require this dial, when you get to the auto, you have to press down on this little gray tab to be able to move it over to lock, and also to move it down to manual. Here you have a depth of field preview. It'll move the aperture blades. Then you have the lens release right there. You have a self-timer, which this is kind of an interesting design because a lot of the self-timers are like dials or something of that, but this model's more after something like the X570, which is the little tab that you lift up. And the light will also flash at a frequency, and then when it gets to, I think it's like 2 seconds, then it'll quicken. And you can tell when that'll fire. You have a flash sync port right there. Up here you have your ASA selector and your exposure compensation dial. Here are the contacts for a power winder that you could put on here. And on the front you'll notice that there's this little grip here, which I think is personally pretty great. It's somewhat similar to the A1 grip, but I think that this works a little bit better because you have a little bit more purchase with your fingers. But regardless, you'd have to disconnect this in order to use the power winder. But I mean, I don't know many people who use power winders, especially with something like a Pentax like this, because it is it's a very small camera. Despite the fact that it's larger than an ME Super, it's still fairly small, and the power winder just adds weight in size without really much of a benefit. Most people who shoot things like sports photography, any other kind of like high-speed photography, will use digital now instead of film, so kind of negates the need of a power winder, but still worth discussing. In the back here you have a little memo holder for your film. I believe that it slides in through the bottom here, and it also has very nice ergonomic feature there. Lift up on the back here. It's the same loading system as the ME Super. You put the film lead in there. In the bottom here, film rewind. Then there's the battery compartment. This takes two 1.5 volts LR44 batteries, load them in there, negative side up. And that is pretty much it. The thing that I do want to discuss, which is pretty interesting, is this little window right here. This is, if you look through the viewfinder, it illuminates a small LED screen that shows you what shutter speed you're firing at, which is great if you're shooting auto and whatever. It illuminates an LED screen. It will show you the shutter speed, and it will show you, if you're on manual, how many stops you are over or underexposed. And also, if you have the proper flash on here, it will show when it's charged up. So that's all good. That's all good and dandy. But the issue is if it's really dark out and you're trying to look through this, it's kind of hard to see. So you just kind of have to figure that out. Like, it only shows the LED with however much light's coming in. So that's just something that using this camera I've kind of run into problems with, but it's not a huge thing. It's just something that's interesting, whereas something like an ME Super, for instance, has dedicated LED lights where you can't always see what the shutter speed is, but depending on the color of the LED, if it's green, you know it's going to be a faster speed. If it's a yellow, so it's easier to kind of tell what shutter speed you're going to be firing at. But this doesn't really have that, so you just have to kind of be wary. But yeah, it's a really great camera, and I don't see anything about them on the internet, which is kind of unfortunate because I do feel like it's another one of those good alternatives to something like an ME Super, something like an MX, something that's a little bit more popular, not like super expensive yet, but like kind of getting there. And they do have these in all black versions as well, but this is the chrome, and then this is like a plastic. So you'll see them with like, they're kind of dented in a lot of the times, or sometimes this little thing is poked through. So be wary of that. This also suffers from the same issue of the infinite winding thing. It's essentially, it's the same winding mechanism and a lot of the same mechanisms as the ME Super, MX, MG, all that good stuff. That is all though. This is the Pentax Program Plus. Appreciate you guys watching, and I will catch you on the next one.